Tech Cocktail Sessions, educational and inspirational talks from experienced startup founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders.
I'd like to introduce you to Jeff Janner.
I think I'm going to start with a little bit of background about where I've been and what I've done. I'll kind of frame 5 lessons that have kind of guided me through these 5 companies, and then give you a little bit more about how these lessons have manifested themselves throughout the time I've been there. So going back to 1980, I got the gray hair here, right? I've been a founder or part of a founding team of 5 companies. And I think you could say throughout my career there's been a common thread, which has been to use advanced technology, again, even going back to 1980, early on to build a business. And that's primarily been focused on marketing, advertising, and kind of digital communications. So the first one was back in 1980, was a company called Larry Miller Productions. He was my original partner. And it was a service business that was self-funded until we started making money and could fund ourselves through operations. So we never had any investment capital for that. And we did something that I don't think anybody does anymore, which is it was 18 years. We started it up, we ran it, and then we ultimately sold it in 1998 to an internet roll-up firm. I'll talk a little bit more about that. From there, I went to a company, we started a company called Traverse Partners, which was also a service business, and it was self-funded. And that was a little bit different. So this was in the year 2000, 2001. What our idea was, mid-market companies that were like $50 to $100 million in sales, had not transformed their businesses to the internet yet. So the idea was to raise a venture fund, a $100 million venture fund, and then to provide the operational guidance to these companies as they went to transform themselves onto the internet. That's the one business that we ended up shutting down, and I'll talk about lessons learned from that. From there, I went to Brightmoon, which was an online campaign management company, email marketing company. That was angel funded. It was a product company, and was beyond angel funding. We ran it profitably and funded its growth through operations. And that was 3 years from start to finish to a sale from a direct mail campaign management company. From there, I was part of the founding team of a mobile advertising firm called Third Screen Media. It was product-based, it was VC-backed. We went through 2 rounds of funding and then sold in 2 years, actually, to AOL. And then that's gotten me to SpringPad, which I've been working on now since late 2008, which is also a product company. It's VC-backed. And we're growing pretty rapidly now, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So I can pretty much sum up my lessons learned. I can boil them down to kind of 5 lessons, and I'll just shout them out here and then kind of walk through them all. But the first one I would say sounds kind of counterintuitive, but it's begin at the end. Know where you're going before you get started. The second one is to, and you probably have heard this one, is to find product market fit as fast as possible and as cheaply as possible. The third one I call SCA, which is Sales Cures All. And then number 4 is actually more of a value, but it's essentially have contempt for obstacles. If you're going to succeed, you've just got to walk all over any obstacle that you come across. And then the last one is the toughest one, and that's to surround yourself with 8s and 9s, not 5s and 6s. Whether they're employees, they're board members, they're advisors, you need to find the 8s and 9s early on. And of course, underlying everything, which I'm sure everybody can appreciate, is you need to have passion for what you're doing, because it's not easy. So let's talk about beginning at the end. Where do you want to end up? You want to do what your idea is forever? Is it an IPO? Is it a trade sale? Is it a merger? Is it a lifestyle business? knowing where you want to end up seems pretty obvious, but it's really pretty amazing. It took me 2 companies to kind of figure out that that would be a good place to start. A lot of the decisions that you'll make, a lot of the everything from the product that you're building to who your customers are, if you know where you're trying to get to, it's going to make a lot of difference in terms of getting there by knowing where you're going. Neither Larry Miller Productions nor Bright Moon were venture funded, and the goal was to sell the company. It was, in both cases, was to sell the company. So the founders looked to retain as much equity and ownership in the company as possible. So that meant taking as little funding as possible. How could we, in fact, fund our operations, fund ourselves through operations, and retain as much ownership as possible, thereby not needing a huge exit to get to a good outcome. So that was from a financing standpoint. With Bright Moon specifically, in 2003, 2004, there were a lot of email marketing companies out there. What we did that was a little different was we thought about where did we want to end up? What was the exit for this company? And what we realized is that there were a lot of big database marketers out there, Acxiom, Experian, Equifax, and there were a lot of agencies that were doing database marketing for companies. And again, we're just coming into the whole email, newsletter time of the market. So you had these huge databases that people would pull lists from and then send out direct mail. So it just seemed obvious to us that email was going to be a better solution, more cost effective, faster time to market, and better to get metrics and analysis than using direct mail. So we built the company focused on how do you attract these database marketers as customers? How do you educate them about email? How do you attach yourself, to their databases as a transactional engine? And that ended up working out really well for us. We had a number of customers, and one of them, a campaign management house, direct mail campaign management house, ultimately acquired us when we had interest from several different firms. The next thing to talk a little bit about is finding product market fit as fast as possible. Obviously, you start your company with an idea, and whether that's the problem you're trying to solve or an opportunity that you see is not met in the marketplace, that's where you're going to start. But how do you know if your idea is a nice to have or a have to have? And who has to have it? So that notion of finding product market fit for us at Third Screen Media was really important. We knew that there was, there's advertisers and there's publishers, and they talk to each other on the internet, and they consider consumers like inventory. And again, back in 2005, nobody was doing any kind of mobile advertising. So from our perspective, to find product market fit, we needed to go find a publisher and an advertiser and understand if we could be the enabler that brought them together. So we went out and we, for free, basically solicited the Weather Channel and USA Today on the publisher side. They had content, it would lend itself to mobile. And then we went on the advertiser side and built relationships with the agencies for Amex, for Unilever, for Bank of America, and for Ford. And these were people that wanted to experiment early on with mobile advertising. And by finding the product market fit at the top of the chain, if you will, with these premium players, we were able then to build our business, to validate that there was an opportunity there, and then to take those early results and use that to build our marketing teams and our sales, our biz dev teams. So talking about sales then, and you talk about sales cures all, again, whether you're a service company, you're a product company, you're B2B, you're direct to consumer, one way to find product market fit, and actually a better way to exploit it, is to focus on sales early on. You may have an awesome idea, you may have the beginning of a product market fit, but finding customers as soon as possible is key for lots of reasons. Again, obviously they're going to tell you whether you have a nice to have or a have to have. They're going to give you feedback specific to your product or what they want or what they need. And if they like you, obviously they're going to spread the word for you, and that's great. And the big thing is maybe they'll even pay you. So I would say let's not be afraid of sales as early as possible. Ironically, what we're doing with SpringPad now is we have a lot of very dedicated users who are note takers and task managers. Our SpringPad are essentially digital cloud-based notebooks. You can save and share things that you want to remember for later. And we have a lot of these guys that want to pay us. But our business model is actually very different than that. So our sales for now is focused on getting user adoption for free, because in the end, what we're looking to do is a fundamentally different business model that's ad-driven and ad-supported that's based on having a fair amount of users. But it's thinking about who are we ultimately going to have sell, or who are we selling to, and what are their requirements, and putting that in place right away. Contempt for obstacles. Over the past 5 companies, there have been a ton of obstacles. In the case of Traverse, which I talked about before, it became pretty clear that raising a $100 million fund in 2001 or 2002 for a first-time group was not going to be overcome. And again, we learned that fast enough, and in that case, that was an obstacle that just ended up saying, we're going to shut down. This isn't going to work. We got to go do something else. So not being afraid to say this one obstacle is insurmountable. On the other hand, going way back to Larry Miller Productions in 1995, you had the internet emerging. We were primarily doing video and film production at the time, and had started doing CD-ROM works. I had, I think, 50 people working for me, and we essentially laid off about half of those people that were video and film, and then in one fell swoop hired 10 people that had started working on the internet. And that's the bet that we made. We said, this is the market opportunity, and that's where we need to go for it. And it was a drastic move, and it worked, so we were lucky. So I think in Boston, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more about this, but consumer tech startups in Boston in particular, creating awareness that you exist, I mean, that's an obstacle. It's an obstacle that we face now. It's an obstacle some of you may be facing when you start thinking about what your startups are. Those are the kinds of things that just demand a lot of attention to how do we do this? How do we overcome this? We can't afford to do a lot of advertising. Where are the lever points, or who are the people that we need to connect with to help us out? And that gets me to the final point here, which is surrounding yourself with 8s and 9s. It's the toughest one of all, especially when you're in a startup situation with limited resources and a highly competitive labor market. But it's also the most important thing you can concentrate on. You need to stretch however you can, or whatever you have to do if you've identified somebody that can really help your business. Obviously, you want to vet them. You want to set clear expectations. You want to set realistic milestones. But if you can stretch beyond what you can believe that you can pay, or what you can afford from an equity perspective, and you're comfortable with this person, it's worth doing. I can't stress that enough. At Third Screen Media, we had a big idea. We knew it was not a question of if mobile advertising was going to happen. We knew it was the question of when it was going to happen. And that enabled us on the biz dev side and on the sales side in terms of advertising. We just went as high up the chain as we could, looking at people at Yahoo, at Google, at AOL at the time, and it was tough. I mean, we really had to convince our board that these people were worth the expense and the equity, but we never would have been able to move as fast as we did if we hadn't made that stretch. I think the same thing with 8s and 9s applies to advisors. It applies to board members. It applies to the, just the rank and file employee. They're going to help with everything that I've just talked about. They're going to help you think about beginning at the end. They'll help with finding product market fit. They're going to help with sales. And they're ultimately going to be the people that you can rely on to overcome the obstacles that you will inevitably encounter. So the last homily that I'll leave you with is when you think about turning ideas and inspiration into action, the one thing I would say is don't know it alone.